Hey, everybody. Josh Sheridan here with the Barely Legal Podcast.
They demand my alter ego, but I won't go.
On today's show, I have a very special guest. I have been, since the creation of this show, been itching to have somebody on who had served in the military, specifically in some capacity with special forces. It's always held a curious space in my mind as to what makes them tick, how they're able to do what they do. And luckily, through some mutual friends, I was able to be put in contact with John Mulbury, who's here today. He is retired Army, Army, former Special Forces, Green Beret, a Ranger certified, Ranger School, all that. I think I'm saying that correctly.
Yeah.
All right. So thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank you for having me, Josh. I appreciate it.
I really appreciate it. I'm sure your days are kept pretty full. I guess you originally were supposed to be gone this week, but your schedule changed or something like that?
Yeah, we had some last minute changes that freed up some time, so it worked out well.
Okay. So kind of jumping right in, you were in the military for 20 plus years. Is that correct?
Yeah, I retired after 30 years in the Army.
Wow. So when did you go in?
I was commissioned in 1986.
Wow. 1986. Now, were you, was your family a military family?
Not at all. My mom was a remedial reading teacher, and my dad was a professional scouter with the Boy Scouts of America. I'm trying to think, there's really nobody close in my family that was in the military, but it was just something that always really fascinated me.
Now, were you an only child or did you have siblings?
I have one older brother, just a year older than me.
And how's your relationship with him, if you care to comment?
It's a great relationship. There was no sibling rivalry there or anything as you can imagine growing up, but it was great.
And did I understand that you're from New York originally?
I am. I'm from a very small dairy farm in town named Skanevis. It's right near Cooperstown. If you're familiar with Albany, you know where that is. It's west of Albany a bit. But
So we were just talking off air. My father is from Albany, New York. His last name is Sheridan, and I've always heard in the family that I'm related to General Philip Sheridan, which in doing some research on you, I saw that you had posted a biography about him. And, as I was telling you, I'm always ashamed how little I know about the connection there. But luckily, I'm always fearful of talking, but if I'm taking a side that would be controversial. But luckily, he fought for the side that I'm proud in laying claim to.
Absolutely.
So, in any event, so Albany, how long were you there? Were you there most of your youth, or did you?
Yeah, I was born and raised there.
Were you an active kid into sports and that sort of thing?
I tried to be, maybe not as active as some folks. I played soccer in high school. I'm from a real small town, so really the only sports we had was, soccer in the fall, basketball in the winter, and baseball in the spring.
Right.
And of course, you can see my height. I'm not much of a basketball player, but I did try to play soccer.
You look like you're probably really fast, though.
I don't know about, not anymore.
Well, back in the day.
Yeah.
So, and your older brother, what was he like?
He was a lot more athletic. He played sports, played them a whole lot better than I did.
Now, was there hunting in the family? Were you guys introduced to firearms at a young age?
Absolutely was. Yeah, that was a big part of our childhood and growing up. And I think, frankly, that's part of what steered me towards the Army.
Well, so this kind of gets me, I don't want to jump too far ahead because there's probably other interesting parts of your life before you went in the military I'd like to talk about. But one of the big things for me is what steers somebody into the military. And I know it's not one answer for everybody. It's, it's different things for different people. But more specifically is the special forces aspect of it, because as I mentioned before, in my training with Muay Thai and Jiu-Jitsu and just different, even as a family law attorney, I've had cases where I've represented people in the special forces or represented spouses against people in the special forces. And they always occupy this unique space for me. It's just very interesting people. And one of the reasons they're so interesting to me is they're so different from me, because I could just automatically pick up that I'm on the other end of the spectrum, mentally, physically, whatever you want to call, psychologically. So, that thing that's alien to you holds a lot of interest to you. So, this is kind of where I wanted to direct the conversation. So, as far as your childhood hunting, introduction to firearms, you said that steered you into your interest in the military. Can you expound on that?
Yeah. Like I say, being in upstate New York, and to make clear, as you know, again, being familiar with Albany, upstate New York has nothing to do with New York City, and that's what everybody automatically equates New York with. But there's rednecks up there. There's plenty of them. But like I said, I grew up hunting and fishing and things like that, spending time in the outdoors, and that's part of what steered me towards the military. And again, with my dad, what he was doing is working as a professional for the Boy Scouts of America. I had kind of not to sound too corny, but kind of a spirit of service kind of that I was exposed to from an early age. So that always kind of fascinated me. And I think the other thing was once again, being from that small town in upstate New York, it represented something different, something a little bit more exciting, and frankly, a way to get out of Skinnevis, New York. So that's why I pursued it.
So were you in New York up until you went in?
I was, yeah. I graduated from high school. I went straight from there to West Point. Spent 4 years in West Point.
Oh wow! And then, I had no idea.
Carried on in the Army. Yeah.
How was West Point?
It's a great place to be from, but it's kind of painful while you're there, I guess is the best way to describe it.
Right, yeah. Right. How did that form you as a person? Do you think that molded you into the person you are today, by good or bad, as far as your views of the world and world affairs and that sort of thing? Yeah,
I think that molded me quite a lot. It showed me that there was a whole lot more out there than the small town that I was from. It kind of humbled me in terms of, it's very easy to be kind of a big fish in a small pond. Well, suddenly I was thrown into a big pond with a whole lot bigger fish. So I realized, that I wasn't, the smartest guy in the room by any stretch of the imagination. It kind of put things into perspective that way. But at the same time, it showed me that, a lot of what that small town did for me provided me with some advantages that some of my peers there didn't have.
Like what?
The attention, the personal attention that we got from our teachers in our school was just incredible. The fact that, I literally knew everybody in my high school class, I think was very helpful because, we had connections that I don't think you can do it in a bigger place.
Now, did your father teach you respect for firearms and how to use them, clean them, say with them?
He absolutely did, yeah, and it was drilled into us. I was frankly fascinated with them for as long as I can remember. But I was, I'm very grateful now for the way my father taught us the respect for firearms and for their use.
This is kind of a broad, sweeping question, so answer it however you want. But do you feel that the respect for firearms is taught today like it was back then, or has become more specialized just for those seeking out that education versus fathers teaching sons, brothers teaching sons, that sort of thing?
Yeah, in my opinion, I don't think it's there anymore. And I think it's because it's become such a divisive issue in the country. You're either on team pro firearms or team against firearms. So I think a lot of that, what we had in the past was lost.
Right. So how does it work with West Point? Is it like a normal school in that can you major in something there, or are you pretty much the same path that everybody's on?
When I was there, and like I say, I graduated in 86, and I think it's changed, but when I was there, they didn't offer technical majors. They offered areas of concentration, which for all intents and purposes are the same as a major, but they didn't have, literally majors. I think that's changed since then.
Now, are you active military upon graduating, or are you active military upon entering the school? How does that work?
It's you're considered active duty military as soon as you enter the school at the rank of a cadet, and then you're commissioned as an officer, as a second lieutenant when you graduate. It's kind of an in between. You're technically active duty, but it's not quite the same as being a commissioned officer. And
so, as soon as you graduate, do they tell you where you're going, or how do you have to bid on it, or how does that work?
Yeah, it's an interesting process. It's based on it actually starts the year before you graduate, or your senior year. Your first year is what they call it there. But it starts with, the first thing is the needs of the Army, where they need people to go. And then that's combined with your rank in the class. Literally every cadet is ranked from 1 to whatever the number is. And so you get, your preference based on where you're
academically and physically, or like what's the metrics by which they
Again, it's very interesting. It's a combination of, again, speaking 30 years ago when I was there, it's a combination of academics, of physical fitness grades, and leadership grades, basically how well you're doing in terms of not getting demerits for doing something wrong, things like that.
And so where were you directed?
I chose the infantry.
Okay.
And I was pretty happy about that. It was my first choice.
Okay.
My first duty assignment was up at Fort Lewis, Washington.
Did you get basic before your first duty assignment, or do they do that while you're in school, or how does that work?
What happens is upon graduation, I went to the infantry officer's basic course.
Okay.
And then after that, I went to Ranger School.
Okay.
And that's we were talking before about the difference between that. It's kind of confusing. Ranger School is about 55, 56 days. It's a very tough school. It focuses on really small unit tactics, but its real focus is on leadership because it's tough. It's a gut check in a bunch of different ways. Just to go down a different rabbit hole, that's absolutely different from the Ranger Regiment.
Okay.
The Ranger Regiment is an Army Special Operations formation that has some very specific missions. So when you ask somebody the question, are they a Ranger or not, you got to dig a little bit deeper to see. Because if I talked to somebody in a Ranger Regiment and said, "Yeah, I went,"
they're going to call you on it. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, I'm a Cretan, so I don't know what I'm talking about. So please correct me
absolutely.
if I'm off base at all. So, one of the things that has always piqued my curiosity is, as an only child growing up in the 80s, I got to watch tons of movies. And in that time, a lot of the movies, the hero of the story was always ex-special force. There was Chuck Norris or Arnold Schwarzenegger or whatever. And in these movies, they're these elite hand-to-hand combats, know how to use all the weapons, just a superhero effectively. And a friend of mine had a buddy who was in the SEALs. And so I was asking him directly and through his friend about him. And they kind of goofed on him and were saying, he just can't be told no, or he can't be told that he can't do something. That's the leg up that he's got in this world. If you tell him he can't swim 20 miles, he's going to do it just to prove you wrong. And so I started to see that more so than the physical essence of it is a psychological or a mental essence of it. Do you see what I'm getting at or understand what I'm asking?
I absolutely see what you're getting at. In fact, when I saw what you wanted to talk about today, that's really one of the things that struck me. You asked about what kind of folks are interested in special operations forces and special forces, and what kind of folks are successful. And I would say the folks that are interested in it, that drives it that are driven towards it, are folks who are looking for that challenge, are seriously looking for that challenge. I think that's the kind of folks that are driven to it. In terms of who are successful, I think it's the folks who are resilient, and just as you say, who don't necessarily take no to an answer when they're trying to achieve that challenge.
But have you ever spent much time on the genesis psychologically of how you become that person, or what is it in your life that made you up for a challenge, or what is it in your life that made you resilient? And before I let you answer that, I spend an hour every week in therapy figuring out why I'm not up for a challenge and why I'm not resilient. And so much of it has to do with my environment as a child, the type of household that I was brought up in. I think some of it might be being an only child. There's a number of different things there, but this is maybe I could ask a better question, but apart aside from what you need, how did you get that? Where did that come from? Was it the Scouts? Was it your father? Was it your brother? Was it a aggregate of those and some other things?
I think to a certain extent, it probably was an aggregate of those kinds of things. I mean, I'll also let you know I suffer from serious imposter syndrome. I feel honestly like I've been Forrest Gumping my way through life up to now, and it's been just a series of fortunate coincidences, that I've been able to have the great experiences that I have in the military and in special forces. But I think that's part of it. I mean, I can remember some instances where, I was posed with a challenge, and, my response in my head was, can I go X-rated here or R-rated at least? When somebody told me I couldn't do something, I can literally remember saying, well, fuck you. Yeah. We're going to do it anyway. I mean, a classic example is, I told you I started out in the infantry. And that was in the late 80s, early 90s, where, if you recall, we were downsizing the military to a serious, by a lot of folks, a lot of formations. I was at Fort Ord, California at the time, and they were disbanding the unit that I was in. They were telling us to pack up, don't need you anymore. So our branch manager, the guy that was in charge of assignments for all of us young infantry captains, supposedly was going to make sure that we were all taken care of. In other words, we weren't lost in the shuffle with these reassignments. I was in company command at the time, which is a big deal for a captain. It's a key and developmental position that makes sure that you're set up for success for your next job. So it had a big impact on my career. Well, this branch manager came down and talked to us and basically said, yeah, we'll send you where we send you. And I said, well, I was told that, they need captains here. And he's like, yeah, that's great, but we'll send you where we send you. And he goes, well, what do you think you're going to do? And I said, well, I've been considering special forces, so I guess I'll put my packet in for that. And he just kind of looked at me and he chuckled. He said, yeah, well, good luck with that. And at that moment, my thought was back to what I said, fuck you, pal.
Yeah.
And of course, that was a serious motivator as I was going through the assessment and selection process for special forces, knowing, having that in the back of my mind. And frankly, knowing that I wouldn't have any home in the infantry if I didn't make it through and had to go back. So,
right.
I mean, that's an example, I guess.
Well, that's a great example. And so kind of one of the things that I've found, and again, I'm sorry, I'm going to make this as much about me as you, but that's the main reason I wanted to talk to you is to help me learn more about, myself too. One of the things that I've learned as I've gotten older is I have a problem with creating boundaries of thought. So staying task focused. I have the ability to be worrying about my mortgage, drafting a motion, talking to my wife, playing with my kid, and all those things are happening at the same time. And it feels to me like someone to be successful in the world that you're in has to be able to almost block everything out except for whatever the objective is and just focus on the objective. Would you agree?
Yeah, I think so.
Is that something you taught yourself or is that something you just had naturally?
I think, number one, I think the Army in general and Army Special Forces in particular has some very good professional development structures that are in place right now, professional military education, and more so for Army Special Forces and Joint Special Operations Forces. So I know that they spend a lot of time studying that kind of stuff and trying to teach it, trying to pass it on.
Sharpen your sword, as it were.
So I think it's a combination of the two.
Okay. So if I'm doing my math, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but 86, that's Reagan.
Yeah.
And you were in for 30 years.
Yep.
So does that put you through Bush or Obama?
Obama, yep.
Okay. So you had a breadth of experience with different policies, different leaders, that sort of thing. Again, so when I do depositions in the legal arena, sometimes we'll do what's called a standing objection, which means I'm not going to object every time you ask a question I don't like. I'm just going to make a standing objection now. So instead of a standing objection, I'm going to make a standing apology. If I ask anything that comes off as offensive or is on a subject matter that's inappropriate, please just tell me. It's not my intention to be offensive or step in a pile that I shouldn't be stepping
Absolutely.
in. But I'm just kind of an idiot, so I appreciate it. So my standing apology is, so one of the things that has become more apparent to me over my adult life is how, you mentioned earlier about firearms, how divisive that's become. We've also seen it with the military. We've also seen it with the police. And I almost think it's being done to the voting public to kind of create sides rather than to let them have a nuanced, well thought out conversation on things. Because one of the things that attributes that I think I do have that helps me is I understand that the world isn't black and white. There's a lot of gray area. So I was listening to a podcast recently with Jon Stewart. You might know that name. He was on Joe Rogan.
Yep.
And he was talking about the disconnect in how much active military are championed versus veterans. It's posited that the right can be very pro-military, pro-foreign policy, pro these sorts of things. But then when someone's out of the military, how they're handled as a veteran, they kind of fall off the radar. Is this something that you have an opinion? When we were talking, you said you have strong opinions, so I'm hoping you brought some with you. I'm interested to know your view on this. I know that was kind of a big question, but do you see that there's kind of a disparity in treatment between people when they're in and when they're out?
I haven't seen that. Again, I can just speak for myself and my 4 years now since I've been retired. But in terms of how people treat active duty versus retirees, I haven't seen a whole lot of difference. I mean, I appreciate the fact that folks acknowledge it and do a lot to try to say thanks and things like that. I haven't noticed a difference between when I was in when I was in uniform and now that I've been retired.
My question more specifically, though, is not how the public is treating you, but how the military is treating you. I've heard of, people with health issues that they aren't not able to get sufficient coverage for or treatment for. Is that something that you've seen, or?
It's nothing that I've experienced, and I'm trying to think. I don't have any, close friends that have been through some real problems that haven't been able to get help. Again, most of my friends, most of my coworkers are in the special operations community as well, and I think here at MacDill, they have infrastructure in place specifically for special operations and special operations veterans that do a superb job of doing just what you say, taking care of not just service members, but retirees and their families as well. I think it's pretty impressive. And I think it's working well as far as that goes. Now, speaking for the general military, for the larger military, I don't know. I'm sure that it's a little bit different. They don't have the resources that the special operations community does to donate to it. But I have, I guess, less experience with that.
Well, when you think of all the people that are in the military versus all the people who are former military, that's such a large group to be able to manage in any kind of meaningful way. So by no means do I think there's an easy answer to it, but it's just something that I've been interested in. As far as your time in the military through those different administrations that we talked about, again, oftentimes it's kind of positioned as though the right is much more pro-military than the left. Did you, and if you can speak on it, if not, standing apology, your experiences under the different administrations, was there any kind of a trend that you saw there? Was there any kind of a experience that kind of showed you that to be true, or maybe not true, or maybe not exactly true?
I think the biggest example of that I saw was when I first came in. I can remember, again, going way back in the day, my time as a cadet, in between.
86, you're right around like Ollie North, aren't you? Just right around that time.
Exciting times as far as that all goes. But let's see, it was between my freshman and junior year, got a chance to do something they called Cadet Troop Leader Training, where they take all us young cadets out and send us out to an active duty regular Army platoon somewhere to pretend to be a platoon leader for a month to give us that exposure. Well, I ended up going to Korea, and I worked with a tank platoon for a month. Fascinating experience, but it was a real eye-opener because the conditions there in Korea were so bad in terms of, you could just see there hadn't been a whole lot of money applied to it in terms of infrastructure, equipment, and things like that. And they were just starting to get the infusion of dollars from the Reagan administration. It was making a huge difference. So I think that was the first example of it that I saw.
So the switch over from Reagan, after Reagan, it was Bush Senior.
Yep.
And then after Bush Senior was Clinton. So you were starting to get the infusions as you came in.
Yeah.
Is that leading up to, they stopped at some point?
No, I don't think they ever did. And I don't think in my career I saw huge differences to that extent that I did from that initial one.
Okay. Did you ever get an opportunity to stand on the wall and look across while you were there? I've heard stories from other friends of mine who are over there, and they said they'd cover up their name tags because they could read your name on your vest, and they would be communicating with you back and forth.
It's pretty fascinating. I mean, it's a serious head game. It's kind of comical. If it wasn't so serious, it would be. But yeah, it's pretty trippy to experience that.
That's insane. And I mean, still to this day, it was just this year when they thought that he might have passed away, but I guess he's still with us.
Yeah,
it's kind of interesting.
It's fascinating.
The lack of insider knowledge, well, at least for the general public. I don't know what the military knows about, but about what's going on over there. So your time in the military, gosh, we're looking at both Gulf Wars, Afghanistan, and then any number of other deals in Africa or where else that we've faced. were you on the ground in some of those areas to the extent you can talk about?
I was, yeah. I've been. I spent most of my time in the Middle East and in Southwest Asia. Some time in Eastern Africa, Northern Africa, and I think that kind of gets back into the folks that are successful in special forces, particularly, and that is again going back to my early days. We were focused, on the big threat, fighting the big war, against at the time the Soviet Union. And I can remember being in doing a computer simulation, a command post exercise where we were fighting, an army that was supposed to be the Russians. And one of the simulations and this was the day where, it had to be computer controllers. Everybody didn't have their own PC.
Sure.
Threw a little twist into the gameplay. And that was, on the battlefield, they injected this mass of displaced civilians that were just running around the battlefield. And I can remember the folks in our headquarters just going crazy. Well, what do we do about all these civilians? Get somebody to control them. But the point was that, we as a military at the time weren't ready to handily accept the fact that we're always going to have to deal with populations. We're always going to have to deal with civilians on the battlefield one way or another. Smash cut forward to the 2008, 2009 timeframe when we've been involved in Iraq fighting an insurgency for those years. We finally acknowledged in terms of our doctrine that there is something out there in terms of dealing with populations when we're fighting. In other words, we just can't wish them away. We have to deal with them one way or another.
Well, almost, and again, you can correct me if I'm wrong, in this setting, it's almost at its most severe as far as a consideration, because you have in one nation at least three pretty distinct sects, there was the Kurds and so you're dealing with people who are at odds, people who are vying for a spot that's now been, created by, our efforts. And so you're not just having to deal with one people, you're having to deal with three people and trying to figure out who wants what, who's on the up and up, it just, what a head game that had to be.
Yeah. And I think, we as a military recognize that something like an insurgency, it's gone from being complicated. When all we had to worry about was fighting the big one against the Soviets, we could template out very, pretty accurately exactly what their formations were going to look like, what their defensive positions were going to look like. So, it was complicated, but it wasn't necessarily complex. Compare that with what you described in Iraq, where everything is changing every day. Every time you do something, that changes the situation. Well, you're dealing with complexity there.
Vietnam was kind of the first look into that, where you have insurgency, you don't know if it's a civilian or a fighter, the guerrilla warfare on a much greater level than you've ever probably seen in Korea or World War II or any of these other things. And so kind of, it's so much more of a head game, not a direct fight. There was just a lot more considerations to it. And also not only that, you're now in the age of TV being there, cameras being on you being in the public eye, so having to answer to the public of how you're doing and what you're doing and why you're doing adds a whole other wrinkle to it.
Yep.
And now we're seeing it with the police, because the police now with cell phones and GoPros and body cams and dash cams and secure. I mean, it's next to impossible anymore to have any interaction with a civilian without being on video camera. And it's very hard to know everything that's going into whatever that exchange is. I'm in an interesting position because I'm a former prosecutor. I'm currently a defense attorney. I personally pretty liberal. I'm a big supporter of the Black Lives Matter and all these other things. But I also have tons of friends who are in the military, tons of friends who are in the police department, and they're great people out there doing an extremely difficult job that's very hard to do.
Yeah.
And so again, things not being black and white, it's that gray area. And so I don't love, and I'm probably at fault for it sometimes too, but how politicized some of these things become, because, there's outliers of these behaviors, good or bad, but generally in the middle, it's people trying to do the right thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know that I had a question there, but anyway. So with your time over in the Middle East, one of the things that, if you have an opinion on, there was a lot of criticism over Bush going in, and then a lot of criticism over Obama trying to get out. We shouldn't have been there, but once we were there, we should have gotten out, because all we did is basically stirred the hornet's nest, then left and didn't have anything in place to kind of, achieve any kind of continued resolution to what the problem was. And there was a movie I saw, and I forget which general it was. You probably know what it was. It was called War Machine with Brad Pitt. Did you see that?
Yeah.
And it was showing how the turnover of people in charge there was creating such a big problem, because there was no continuity of effort, no continuity of strategy, no continuity of understanding that you're like hitting the reset button every 6 to 8 months. Is that something that you saw there or have any opinions on?
Yeah. I think that's, I think that's a common, frankly, I think a lot of people have identified that as an issue. There's and I can't remember where I've seen it, but a couple different places, I guess, where folks have described the war in Afghanistan in particular, not as at this point, 19-year war, but 19 one-year wars for exactly, what you described, the change in people. I think we're doing better at that now in terms of the folks at the very top, leaving them there for a longer period of time, because, just as you say, these things take time. I guess that's mitigated to a certain extent, for better or worse, the fact that, we've got repeat offenders going back there, folks that have, when I was in the Army, we grew up wondering if we were ever going to go to the big game, ever actually going to go to war. And it wasn't until, I missed out on the first Gulf War. I was at the infantry officer basic or advanced course rather. And, we thought literally we'd missed the big war, for our generation.
Well, you didn't.
We didn't. And compare that with the folks that are growing up now. I mean, for crying out loud, there's folks coming in the military that were born after 9/11. So they've had to deal with this, literally their whole lives, let alone their whole military career. So.
Yeah, it's interesting. So you brought up 9/11. I was in law school when 9/11 happened. I remember watching it on the television set and being scared to death, not knowing what it meant or having any idea what it meant. And, kind of watched how the dominoes have fallen since then. One of the things that, became a talking point early on, it's kind of seems like ancient history now, is why we're there. There's a lot of Dick Cheney and Halliburton and a cash grab on oil. Then there was, we've got this dictator who's killing his own people and gassing his own people. We need to protect them. Any views that you could talk on about why we're there? And if not, it's okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is probably going to sound naive on my part, but I think, and frankly, just like Vietnam, at least initially, I think we were there for the noblest of purposes.
Sure.
I think we were there for the right reasons. Things absolutely in both cases would have been different had we had perfect information right from the beginning, but we didn't. But I think, again, I don't think we were there with any kind of nefarious or bad intent or greedy intent. I think we were honestly there trying to do the right thing.
Being over there, are there any specific memories that stand out, things that surprised you? I've talked to people and they've talked to me about the smell of burning tires in the desert, or, these mansions, or, I've talked to friends who are in the private sector and they basically just watched Hussein's sons drive around in cars all day long. And, was there anything that kind of, when you talk about that time period, sticks out in your mind?
Boy,
probably everything. So much. Yeah.
I don't, it's nothing in particular, I guess. Yeah.
So another component besides just the physicality and the mental strength that it takes to do it is, I have to imagine that just being scared shitless, learning how to push through that is a skill set that maybe either is acquired or you're blessed with or whatever else. But I mean, you're putting yourself in these, insane situations that, no one would rationally do, but for the job that you've enrolled, decided that you're going to do. How is that? Like, is it like an adrenaline thing? Like you're not even thinking of it when you're there, or you are thinking of it, or what was your experience in that regard?
I think a couple different things. I think in terms of, again, special forces in particular and special operations forces, we have a bit of an advantage in that we're able to, as I say, we were back when I was there, able to assess and select folks. So in other words, they were able to look for folks that had the right attributes to make them successful, or had the tendency to make them more successful at those things. Attributes like perseverance, attributes like the ability to deal with complexity, like we talked about before. And one attribute is to be able to learn things. And then everything that wasn't one of those attributes, I think they're able to provide you the training and or the education to get you there. So that's part of it. And frankly, I think that's why a lot of folks stay in special forces and special operations forces, because of the fact, that you're working with folks that have those attributes, have been through that same assessment and selection process that you have. So, you kind of know, what
more
you're
of a
dealing
team,
with. Yeah.
So you feel taken care of.
And then I think on top of that, as part of that training, part of it is stress inoculation. Where they do everything that they can to make things as stressful and as difficult for you beforehand, so that you get a chance to work out all that kind of stuff. Either successfully or unsuccessfully as you're going through the stress inoculation.
Yeah, you don't want to learn it on the field.
Yeah, exactly. So you can feel what it's like. When your butthole puckers up and things like that, and in a less costly environment.
Now, is it still that way? Because I've heard, but maybe I'm wrong, that they've had to soften their approach more over time than they did maybe when you were in. Is that something that you're? I
don't believe it. I mean, everybody hears that, and it's very easy to say, yeah, back in the day, back when I went through, the class I went through was the last hard class. Yeah. It's easy to say that, but I had a chance in my career to go back and see, how they had changed the training pipeline up to that time. And of course, we were hearing the same things, but from what I saw, it was every bit as challenging as when I went through, if not more so. And frankly, in a whole lot of ways, a whole lot more so. Right. And I think the same as today. I trust, I know the folks that are there in the leadership positions now that are responsible for training the young special operators. I trust them. So I'm absolutely confident that, like I say, it's at least as difficult as when I went through, if not more so.
Right. So a couple other things I want to talk. We touched on mindset. I want to talk to you a little bit about guns, if I could. I was brought up in a household with no firearms in it. My household has no firearms in it. I say this half jokingly and half seriously. My main fear with owning a firearm is that I'd use it on myself. I'm a Irish Catholic, family of alcoholics. I can get pretty dark now and again, and I just don't want it have it right there for me. Yep. But I've got some good friends who are very into it, very responsible with it. They do all the training, and their feeling is if I'm responsible and I'm doing the appropriate training, I should. My buddy Chris Guarino, who's on the show, is if I should be able to own a tank if I want to buy one legally. That's what he says, but. One of the things that I'm always worried about is oftentimes when you hear of these shootings, the people who have them aren't these people who are responsible, who are educated. And the question is, well, how are they getting them? Are they stealing them from vehicles? Are they getting them from their parents who weren't locking them up? And so, there's this one perfect world that everybody has idealistically of no one that's not a police officer or military has guns. And then there's this other idealistic world where, well, all the people who are responsible have them, but just they have them. And again, it's that kind of middle ground. So, what's your take on that?
I think I think there's some middle ground there. I mean, obviously, I'm a supporter of the right to keep and bear arms. I think it's significant. I think it's significant to our government and our American way of life. Once again, without being sounding too corny. I think it's it is proper. But I think, like you said, I think a problem is education. I think, when we talk about violence, when we talk about criminal violence and criminal use of firearms, I don't think necessarily the problem is the firearm itself, the tool itself. I think there's a whole lot of other contributing factors, and this is stuff that gets hashed over in the news all the time. So I'm not saying anything new, but.
No, but I think people would be interested to hear your opinion on it because, I kind of, intentionally and subconsciously, we hear these phrases like groupthink or echo chamber, where I just surround myself with friends who all say the same thing. So I'm interested to hear, other views on it by people who are actually in a position to have, well-reasoned views on it. So, one of the things we always talk about is assault rifles, but you start to dial in, well, what is an assault rifle? Is an AR-15 an assault rifle? What's an assault rifle? High capacity magazines, bump stocks, all these different things. And, I appreciate that if someone wants to kill you, they can do it with a spoon or a paperweight or whatever. But again, just like my concern with me possessing a firearm, it makes it a whole lot easier to do it successfully, and then also do a volume of people if your aggression is outward projected. So that's my concern generally. And then being in the legal field, we've talked about people with domestic violence records or these other indicators that might show that they're not probably the best candidate to own a firearm. I feel like, one side saying you're not going to take our firearms, and it was like, well, we don't want to take your firearms. We just want kind of a middle of the road path that we can kind of talk about this, but it's, you got to be on one side or the other. Yeah,
I think, again, I'll probably get violently assaulted when I leave here by some of my friends, but I think the middle of the road is really the proper perspective for this. I mean, because, as we talked about, owning and using a firearm, there's a great responsibility that goes along with it. And some folks, are able to handle responsibilities, whether it be owning guns or driving cars or whatever. So I think, there's always going to be a gap with folks that don't use them responsibly. Again, whether it's guns, whether it's cars, whether it's alcohol, whatever it is.
Right.
So I think, we need to do something to police up the folks who have demonstrated that they can't handle that responsibility. So
this gets me to kind of another topic with some overlap there. But, in the past year with George Floyd, his death, Breonna Taylor's death, there's been a lot of discussion about defunding the police, the quote unquote militarization of the police. And this again is a conversation where it seems very difficult for people to meet in the middle and say, maybe the police, their job isn't to solve every problem that people are having, from a cat in a tree to someone needing to be Baker acted to, someone taking hostages to a mass shooting. That, there's a couple of logical problems there. Number one is they can't be equipped to do all of it well. And then also maybe the approach is kind of a military organization versus maybe more of a mental health organization or some of these other things. So I think the phrase defund the police is horrible PR. I don't think it should be called defund the police. Maybe reorganize our approach on the police, or maybe let's have a conversation about how we can do this better with the police. But that becomes something that you either have to be on one side or the other. And then, with the Black Lives Matter, then you get, well, all lives matter. And it's like, okay, well, I don't think the position is that all lives don't matter, but we are seeing, I think, a trend of people, being harmed in a ratio that's disproportionate. And so what's going on there? Why is that happening? So is this something that you have an opinion on or thought about?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how much I've thought about it, but I guess I've got an opinion for what it's worth. I mean,
I think
in a lot of ways, it goes down to respect. I think
respect of law enforcement,
respect of law enforcement, and respect by law enforcement. So, number one, they've got police officers. I have a tremendous amount of respect for them. I always have, and I recognize that they've got an incredibly difficult job. I mean, it's something that I couldn't do, that I frankly wouldn't want to do, and I know a lot of folks are incapable of it and wouldn't want to do. On the other hand, again, going back to the from a military perspective and some lessons we learned with respect to counterinsurgency in Afghanistan, for example, we learned how unsuccessful it is to do a night raid. In other words, to barge into somebody's compound, to roust the family out, to just smash and burn everything that was in there when we were looking for a certain individual or certain pieces of equipment, and then picking everything up and going. We learned that that's not the way to have a positive impact on a population that we're dealing with. That we learned that we go in there with a little bit more respect. We call the people out. We let them know what we're doing. And I think if we go into it with that mindset, it makes things a little bit easier. So in other words, not trying to antagonize people right from the get-go.
Well, it's interesting. I've never really thought of it in the way that you just put it, but in a lot of ways, it's especially in inner city neighborhoods or maybe where, the color of the people that you're dealing with or the ethnicity or culture of the people you're dealing with may not reflect the force that's policing that area, much in the same way being in Afghanistan or Saudi Arabia. You've really got to figure out how to have a relationship there.
Yeah.
And like you said, you see on there's the one way which you've kind of referenced, you kind of, burn every, well, it's funny because there's a quote from General Sheridan in that post. It's like, leave them with only their eyes to weep over losing the war. I was like, wow, that's a pretty intense position to take. But then conversely, like, making friends with the people there can help you have a longer term success. You'd rather have a trust level there. You'd rather have like you said, a respect and not a fear there. It seems to have more of a longevity in being able to serve a longer term goal than, smashing the thing up and kind of mixing it up with everybody.
And if I can, try to tie this back to, what we talked about, special forces and special operators, I think once again, that's something that makes a special forces operator successful, is the understanding, the recognition, that war at the end of the day is a human endeavor. I mean, we're now in the 21st century. We're dealing with things like social media and AI and machine learning and things like that. But at the end of the day, war is always going to be a human endeavor, and to win a war, it's been a while since we've, won a war, but it takes, more than just schwacking all the bad guys and stacking bodies. It takes convincing that population, that they have lost and that you have won. And maybe you can do that without firing a single shot, but maybe you can't. I mean, going back to counterinsurgency, the Russians were able, the Romans way back in the day were able to do counterinsurgency. It wasn't by winning the hearts and minds, which is another trope that, I'll get into in a minute, but it wasn't through winning hearts and minds. It was by crucifying all of Spartacus's, underlings that rebelled and hanging them on the side of the road, Right. So you can defeat an insurgency that way, but is that the best way? Probably not.
Yeah.
It's a technique, but it's probably not the best technique.
Sure.
Another technique is to find another way to convince them, that they have lost. We can look at the difference between, World War II and the first Iraq War. A lot of folks will argue that World War II was just a continuation of World War I. We had never convinced the Germans that they had lost the first war. Although we defeated them militarily, we didn't convince the population of that. So they were able to, to resurge. And then we've got World War II. And compare that with what's happened post World War II with Germany and Japan. There, the populations were absolutely convinced, yep, they had lost. So anyway, I'm not sure where I was going with that. But again, that's what
we were comparing police strategy in neighborhoods to military strategy, wherever they've got boots on the ground. But I never really thought of it in those terms, but it makes a lot of sense to me because, you've got to think of there's the long play and the short play. The short play is, I got to arrest this guy or I got to stop this guy from whatever he's doing. But the long play is we need to be able to have an open dialogue with these people. We don't, we can get much further with respect than fear. And, and I don't know if how some of these things are happening. It's getting us closer to that or further away from that. But I mean, in my lifetime, I haven't seen protests like what we're seeing now. But again, could that be the media? Could that be an election year? I mean, there's all sorts of things that go into it. So there's a couple other things I wanted to ask you about. So another thing, and a standing apology. So when Trump took office, his cabinet, he filled it with a lot of generals and former generals, and it was very favorable to the military in that regard. A lot of respect given him for that. And since that time, though, many of them have left, and kind of after they've left the cabinet, kind of shaking their head and say, I don't know what's going on there. I'm kind of worried about how things are going on. And the other thing I wanted to ask you about, to the extent you can discuss it, is the issue that came out recently about the Russians putting bounties on American soldiers' heads, and how that was regarded or disregarded by the government. So any views about kind of how we're handling foreign policy now and what's going on with the generals and that sort of thing?
Again, the views that I'm going to express are just my opinion.
You're just here by yourself today. You're not representative of anybody.
Crusty old retired guy.
Sure.
But I think, when you read the president's national security strategy and the emphasis that it puts on working with partners and allies, I think is spot on. I think everybody will acknowledge that is significant.
Explain to me what you just said there, because I'm not sure I understood it. Working with partners and allies?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, and it implies, again, this is the president's national security strategy that he signed in December of 2017. One of the points of that is that, there's a significant benefit to working with partners and allies through structures like NATO, and bilateral partnerships and relationships as well. Unfortunately, it seems that, we're making our relationship with NATO in particular a whole lot more contentious than it needs to be. I don't think they're necessarily, that institution is what we want to be picking apart. I think we want to be, living up to the words that are in the national security strategy and supporting those institutions to benefit us as well as everybody else in the long run.
Why do you think that's happening? Picking apart NATO?
I think. I don't know.
Yeah.
I think there's folks that feel, certain countries, certain players aren't paying their fair share of it.
Right.
I don't know about that. I can't speak to that. But my personal opinion is I think we'd be a whole lot worse off without a NATO or without us being, leading NATO than we would otherwise.
Now, one of the things you talked about earlier in the show was how, you coming in the military, the training and kind of the thinking was very demarcated by the experience with Russia. And it seems like today our relationship with Russia is much different from it was when you went in the military in 86. Do you have any views on that or opinions on that?
Boy, in a lot of ways, it's almost like Back to the Future.
Yeah.
It's, we thought, when was it? 1989, when the Berlin Wall came down, when the USSR fell in 1990, 91, we thought for a while there we could, they were going to join the winning team, be our allies, be our partners, be our friends, come on in for the big win, and then smash cut forward 10 years after that, after we've experienced Putin in power for a while, and we see that's not necessarily the case. Things are, as contentious now as if not more so during the Soviet era. So I think it's very sporty, if you will, on managing that relationship right now. I think it's something that we need to be concerned about.
Well, sure, and I don't disagree, but there's, it seems like a head scratcher in some ways that seem like obvious points of contention or talking points. They're kind of either overlooked or, obviously the left has argued there's now this kind of kinship or friendship with Trump and Putin. And I don't know if you agree that that's happening or that's much ado about nothing or.
I don't know. I don't know what to make of it because again, we see, what the policies are we're trying to do to compete with both Russia and China, and yet we see the kind of personal relationships that the president's I don't know if he's formed or at least, presents the perception of forming with both of those leaders. And there's kind of a disconnect right there.
Right.
And I guess, I kind of scratch my head about that. I'm not sure.
Well, it's so hard today. And I've had this conversation with other people is it seems until recently you could talk about an objective truth. You could talk about empirical facts.
Yeah.
We know this to be true. We can argue about what we think about that, but we know this to be true. And literally anymore, we can't even find a common ground on.
It's scary.
Right. And I don't know if you can unring that bell. I feel like, as a kid, you go to the beach and at first you go knee deep in the water and it's like, okay. And then you go the next day and okay, you go waist deep. Before you know it, you're swimming out past the markers without a thought in the world. In a lot of ways, I kind of see the political arena that way now. I feel like we've swam way out past the markers and I don't know how we ever bring that back in. Like, we've got this playbook now for what's acceptable or if maybe not acceptable, what you can get away with. And I just don't know that once you know that you have that available, and I'm saying on either side, that you can reel that back in. And so it scares me, there's all this talk about delaying the election and what's going to happen with the post office and mail-in ballots and all these other things. And it's just, we're going to have to rethink how we do this, I think, to somehow kind of course correct.
Yeah, I think it's so unfortunate, but I think we've lost the ability to compromise. And I think so much of our system of government depends upon that compromise. I mean, I think it's very unfortunate. I mean, some big heroes of mine are George Bush Sr. And John McCain. And I mean, both of those individuals, I think, number one, I think their integrity was pretty spot on, which I think is more than significant. I think it's absolutely critical for a leader of any capacity. But I think those two individuals demonstrated their ability to look past partisan issues and to compromise when it was necessary. And they were able to, they were strong enough to, if you will, to acknowledge that compromise doesn't signal weakness. It signals the way to get things done.
Now, I know McCain was a vet. George Bush, I know, ran the CIA. Was he former military?
He was absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I wonder, does that, do you think, play a role in it? How many presidents are we now since one served in the military? We got Trump who didn't. We have Obama who didn't. We have Bush Sr. did.
Yeah.
Bush Jr. did, right? Wasn't he in the Air Force? Or?
He was like in the National Guard.
National Guard,
yeah.
Okay. And then Clinton who didn't. And so I'm wondering if there's something there,
Again, I'm probably a little bit biased on this, but I would like to think so. I think a lot of the values that, number one, attract folks to the military, and number two, that the military instills in folks are, I would like to think are what got, George Bush Sr. and John McCain to where they are. I can't help but think that helped formulate, some of their thinking.
It's funny because before my wife and I had children, other people in our family would always bemoan how difficult it was, or how much lack of sleep, or all this other stuff. And we would get frustrated because we said, we don't have children, but we're intellectual people. We can understand, what that life would be, even if we haven't experienced it. But now, as a father of two children, I had no fucking clue what I was talking about before I had kids. So probably a horrible analogy, but to have someone who hasn't served in the military, to have someone who hasn't been boots on the ground, to have someone who hasn't done those things, it's hard to make. I'm not saying it can't be done, but you're at a deficit there. I would imagine, and this happens in family law a lot too, because a lot of times we get judges. I think tomorrow is the election here locally. Yep. And I've had a bunch of judges on the show, and a good number of them never did family law. And usually the place that they put these judges first is in family law, because there's no juries there, and that's kind of how they groom them. But I've had any number of trials or motions or whatever in front of a family law judge, and I'm just like, I don't even know where to start. Like I can't even start with the facts of what we're talking about. I have to go back and teach the law to you before I can even make the argument to you. So with a veteran running for an office versus someone who isn't, I have to imagine that plays a big part in it.
Again, I think it's there's personalities involved as well. It would certainly depend on the individual veteran, but
sure,
I think there's something
to make
there.
It to the level that the veterans, like who was it? Wes ran a couple elections ago. He was running as an independent. I think he ran against Obama.
Wes Clark, Wesley Clark.
I'm getting old. My brain's not working anymore. But I mean, for you to be former military in the spot to be running for an office, you have to have gotten past the, I lucked out getting where I am. I've established I should be where I am. So I don't know that there's another testing ground out there in politics like that.
Yeah. I mean, that's a great point. It's, kind of sink or swim.
So you brought this amazingly esoteric notes that you had, and then you turn them over. Was there anything on the notes that I didn't talk about or ask you about?
No, I think we covered them all.
Really?
My little crutch here. Yeah.
Oh, that looks amazing. I was hoping you were going to teach me military strategy or something.
No, anything you want to know.
Now, how do you know Jalal? Do you train over at Tampa Muay Thai?
I do. I've been training there for about 3.5 years. Yeah.
Did you train anywhere else before going there?
I did not. I needed a retirement hobby, and I stumbled onto them, and man, I'll tell you what a great facility, what a great team they got down there.
Do you find yourself teep kicking recliners and shin kicking your refrigerator door shut? And my wife will tell you she hated me when I was training jiu-jitsu and Muay Thai because I was always, respectfully and softly, but I was always, a rear naked choke here. And
much to my wife's chagrin.
That's right.
And I've converted the garage into a pain cave where I've got my bag and everything hanging. So absolutely, yeah.
I started there around 2009, and it was Ray was still there, and Ray and David and Jalal, and it was just. It becomes a religion. Like it's all you want to think about. It's all you want to do. You watch YouTube videos. You buy up all the gear. And it's just, constantly on your mind. And it's amazing because you form quite a family of people there. I mean, they become your friends and you talk about and do everything. And they were on Lemon over near the Armory when I was there. Then they moved somewhere else, and now they're the place on Franklin. But what a great gym! And
and have you been there since the COVID thing? Because they've done some great upgrades in there since then. I mean, it's incredible. It's really nice.
So I won't name names, but I've probably divorced every coach in the last 6 years that's gotten divorced there. So I'm told I have free training for life there, but also with my jiu-jitsu friends. But I've it's pizzas, tacos, and little kids. That's kind of where my days go. Well, so you brought up COVID, it ended up kind of circling back to something. But one of the things that I had often thought about that might be a way to kind of bring the divisiveness, bring us together across the aisle, is I almost thought the only way that could happen is if there was such a dastardly world event, kind of like a 9/11. If you remember 9/11, everybody loved Bush after 9/11. He was on TV, he was on the rubble, and all this stuff, and everybody loved Giuliani. I mean, everybody was there. There wasn't that acrimony, and that lasted for a little bit. And then we kind of went back to where we're at. But I was almost wondering for a while there if COVID would be the thing that did it. And boy, did it not do it. It sent us in opposite
Quite the
direction.
opposite, yeah.
But have you ever thought about that? Like there would almost have to be like a seismic event for us to kind of put aside differences to bring us back together.
Yeah. And I think, it's it's unfortunate that COVID and this whole crisis didn't do that, because I think I'm like you. I was kind of expecting or anticipating that maybe we'd have one of those post 9/11 moments, but as you said, it never materialized, and in fact just frankly divided us even more. So I don't know.
Do you think it's funny because before Afghanistan and the Gulf War, I had remembered there being kind of talk we weren't going to have that type of warfare anymore. We weren't going to have soldiers on the ground. We weren't going to have, it was, going to be drones, or it was going to be people at a computer wherever. I mean, do you think the face of warfare is changing, or do you think there's always going to be room for both those things?
Oh yeah, it's changing. I mean, we can look around and see examples right now. If for crying out loud, it's not changing. It has changed. When you look at what the Russians are doing in Eastern Europe, with the whole little green men thing, and
what is that? I don't even know what you're referring to.
The Russians. I don't have. I wish I had better notes on that right now to talk about. But the way they're fighting some of the Baltic states what they're doing in the Ukraine, for example, they're fighting without the little green men specifically refers to the fact that there are allegations that there are Russian special operations folks that are in there fighting, representing themselves as something else, folks that have just kind of appeared, nobody knows where, that are doing the fighting, and clearly they're proxies on the part of the Russians, but they're waging that they're waging.
Well, it's interesting. So it's kind of it mirrors in a way what you're seeing with some of these riots and protests. There's a lot of allegations of these are actually white supremacist guys dressing up as Antifa and doing whatever. So kind of stirring up the pot, and creating this event where there might, and I'm not saying that that's true or not. I don't know, but it reminds me of that.
There's a couple great books out there that talk about this concept. The one is the New Face of War by a guy named Sean P. McFate, talks about that, how things have changed. There's one by Peter W. Singer is his name, that talks about what he calls near war, where he talks about, and again, specifically what's going on with Russia and their use of social media, to where, they're doing all those things without ever having to fire a shot. They're influencing they're getting in that population's mind and convincing them that they have won or lost using social media. I mean, it's really, number one, it's scary, but number two, it's fascinating.
For sure. That brought up another point I wanted to ask. Oh, so again, I quite enjoyed the Obama administration. I was a fan. I felt like he represented my values and morals, but I've had colleagues, and the conversation at some point always talks about what happened with him and drones. And I to this day, much like my knowledge of General Sheridan, still don't have much idea at all of what they're talking about. I have some idea of what they're talking about, but one of the things that I've seen and is, you're faced with these hard decisions in a role of leadership, especially in the military or in government, where it's not a matter of no one dying and the person you want dying. It's acceptable loss. It's acceptable collateral damage. And, I suspect that there's a lot of things that we have to do as a nation that the people knowing about, probably wouldn't play out the way that they wanted it to. So, I don't even know that I know that that's not a well-formed question, but is there some component of what this nation has to do and what the people are aware of? There's kind of a discordance there or a disconnect.
I think there has to be. I mean, I think part of the government's responsibility is, to protect the people, and I think it's the nature of the beast that we. Straight up, there has to be secrets. I mean, look at Snowden. So many people think of him as an absolute hero for exposing, for shining a light.
Sure.
I think just the opposite. I think he's a traitor. I think I am absolutely disgusted when I think about the information that he gave to our enemies and adversaries that literally cost people's lives. I see the difference in the requirement to protect those secrets. And I'm not saying all of them, but I mean, just, I recognize, I know I had to sign a statement of non-disclosure that says, sure, I'm not going to give up any secrets. Right. And it just, it disgusts me. And to a certain extent, it breaks my heart when I see people like that I know has cost lives, and they're considered heroes. So I think, again, maybe I'm naive, probably I'm naive, but I think there's certain things that the government has to do that are done for the right purposes that everybody in the population doesn't need to know about.
And it seems so difficult now, with technology advancing at an ever increasing rate and social media and information becoming so much more readily available, how much harder and harder it's going to be for the government and military and all these things to be able to conduct business without it being, right there on the front page of the newspaper. And so I don't know if that's just an unavoidable reality and how that manifests. Does it change the behavior of government and military, or does it change the threshold of the public to accept, what kind of has to be done or might be a necessary evil? It seems like there's room for movement on both sides of that consideration.
Yeah.
So anyway, well, I can't tell you how much I appreciate you coming by. It was an education for me. I respect you. I respect what you did for this nation, what you continue to do. I know you a busy person, and you were brave enough and kind enough to come here and to speak to me on these topics, which I can imagine could put you in Dutch with some of your friends for not sharing their opinions. So,
well, I appreciate it. I had a great time. I really did.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right.